Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree DLC introduced an incredible ensemble of new bosses to the game's roster, and in this video we're going to rank them, but with a twist. Since we focus on lore here, we're going to rate bosses based on how well their design embodies their lore as per Fromsoft's vision. For example, Malenia would score well for having high difficulty, where Godric would score well for being much easier, since he lost badly to Malenia in the Shattering and is known as a feeble demigod. High scores are given for designs which add to a boss's lore, and low scores are for when a design gives little lore or even has dissonance with their lore. Bosses will be judged on 3 criteria as follows: gameplay, visuals, and sound. Then there will be a final score of my opinion on the overall merit of their lore. This way, a boss may perfectly encapsulate the lore Fromsoft has written for them, scoring highly in the first 3, but is unlikely to get top marks overall if that lore is uninteresting. Of course, we all have different opinions, so I'd love to hear how your rankings differ in the comments below. For the most lawful bosses. No, that's not right. Loresome? The most loresome bosses. Yeah, that's better. So, let's start with number 11, Commander Gaius. Commander Gaius was the leader of Messmer's men, and with Messmer was as a brother to Radahn. He, like Messmer, was cursed from birth, which is likely the reason for his role. He's actually an Albinauric who suffers from the same leg afflictions we see elsewhere in the game, and as such, is always found atop the boar he called his other half. He was taught gravity magic alongside Radahn by the same Alabaster Lord as his most senior disciple, where they naturally became rivals in their youth, and even developed sorceries together as a product of their friendly competition. Looking at the gameplay, Commander Gaius doesn't have a cutscene, and he doesn't have a voice. He charges over to you from the gateway to the Nameless Tower, which is even more curious than Messmer's commander being found secretly behind the Shadowkeep. Gaius is powerful, relentless, and skilled. He mows you down, whether on torrent or not, and makes it clear that he was a force to be reckoned with. His gravity skills are either unique, where he confidently makes use of simple swipes to do complex attacks, or clearly resemble those of Radahn. Even more interesting, he includes his boar in his gravity movements, showing both skill but also an unwillingness to part, unlike Radahn, who is still very fond of his steed. He's not incredibly difficult, and he's not too complicated. His moveset can be pretty hard to get to grips with, famously from the charge, but once you have his limited moves down, which is very possible, he's a simple foe compared to some other bosses. His prowess and competence on the battlefield, the nods to Radahn, and the subtle hints at him being an Albinauric without the use of his legs means that the fight does depict the lore of Gaius well, but the same lore can be found elsewhere, so it doesn't really add much. 3 out of 5. Moving on to visuals, the arena you find Commander Gaius in seems very unremarkable. It feels hidden, or even forgotten. It's a very suspicious placement. There's an Albinauric shack behind, which makes you wonder whether he lived there, or whether he was stationed to guard something. And on closer inspection of the arena, there is actually the remains of a mass slaughter or a battleground, where the only instance of banished knights in the Realm of Shadow are found. A huge number of corpses, and even some gladiators. Were these banished knights banished to the Shadow Realm? Were they betrayed? Gaius suddenly seems less random in placement. Looking at the boss himself, he's very unique. He feels powerful in his specialized armor and is incredibly fearsome and threatening. The design of his boar feels prehistoric in its prowess. His gravity moves, however, aren't groundbreaking, and in truth they pale in comparison to Radahn or Astel, despite being a rival to Radahn in their earlier years. Overall, the arena is the only detail which adds to the lore here, but it does pose some interesting questions for Gaius. 3.5 out of 5. Moving on to sound, Commander Gaius is the only boss in this ranking whose soundtrack isn't original. It's actually from the base game. It's called Old Warriors, and it's the same that is used for Commander Nile, so there's more connections to the Banished Knights and their commanders here. A story that sheds a totally new light on all the Banished Knight lore, on rereading their base game item descriptions. This does elevate the lore a little, but similarly there's little to pass here. 2.5 out of 5. As for my opinion, while I did actually enjoy this boss and its lore, it doesn't really add to the overall lore of Elden Ring, and though inoffensive, it isn't really compelling enough to be interesting in its own right. I like the tidbits with Radahn and Messmer, of the teasing with his armor set having trousers, and his attacks relating to Radahn too, but in the end it doesn't really change how I engage with the game, and I found the lore of the surrounding area and even the Nameless Tower nearby more interesting. so 2 out of 5. Which leaves Commander Gaius with an overall score of 11 out of 20. Next up in 10th position, we have Rellana, Twin Moon Knight. Rellana is the sister of Rennala. Yup, that's Elden Ring for you. Rellana was once a Carian princess, where she was trained by Count Ymir in sorcery until he abandoned his allegiance. Rellana then in turn abandoned her birthright to follow Messmer, where Rennala gave her the gift of lustrous black hair. She fought in the Crusade most likely, becoming known as the Sword of Messmer, and alone conjoined flame and moon. But was this love unrequited? Looking at Rellana's gameplay, she too doesn't have a cutscene, and the first impression makes her seem almost unimportant and cast aside, forgotten. The fight is fast-paced, highly skilled, and relentless. She's no joke, so it must be story-related that she's not hyped up so much. She curiously uses little sorcery, though what she does use immediately relates to the Carian staples seen in the Lands Between, but at a far more skilled level than that, so despite not using much sorcery, she is clearly still a master. Her second phase makes it clear what she represents: fire and the moon. If her name wasn't enough, the themes of Caria are shown in her twin moons, which harkens to both the other royal Carians we know. There's quite a contrast between the elegance of the sorceress attacks, with the less accurate and forceful manner that the fire attacks are thrown out. There's training on one side, and passion on the other. She also tends to lead her attacks with her left hand, which could also suggest that the fire comes first to her, and that the moon comes second, despite fire not appearing in the first phase. This is a very difficult fight. Her skill and pacing is relentless, and can be overwhelming to the point that she can be difficult at any stage unless you have the damage to match. A true warrior. Leda can be summoned for this fight, but Dryleaf Dane's summon sign was removed in a previous patch. Lore-wise though, this isn't particularly enriching. There's a lot here that adds to the lore of Rellana, and even without a cutscene, much of her backstory can be gleaned from how the fight progresses, so Rellana gets a 4 out of 5 here. Looking at visuals, Rellana is found in a castle with clear relations to Messmer with a camp outside, but within it's very clearly a Carian stronghold. Her courtyard is somewhat unremarkable, save for a chair and a pool of water, but in fact this chair is missing from the Carian manor, which tells the story of how Rellana cast aside her lineage for Messmer, and yet we find her here, nowhere near Messmer, and she doesn't reveal the flame until the second phase. She's found by this water, a moon-gazing technique where you can easily see the celestial movements in the still reflections. Perhaps she is sorrowful, or even regretful, looking towards not what she followed to the land of Shadow, but that which she left behind. Her armour illustrates her devotion as a warrior, and the black hair is a subtle nod to Rennala's gift to her on her departure. Her castle is optional, and though it blocks the most natural path through the land towards Messmer, even this seems to say that her role is not required, perhaps not even appreciated. While somewhat lackluster in some ways, I do think all this neatly delivers exactly what Fromsoft wanted, that Rellana is not some honoured and important leader in this realm. She forsook her lineage, only for Messmer to have little use for her in the present day. 4 out of 5. Listening to Rellana's soundtrack, it's got tons of movement and it's fast paced, very much like the fight. There's even a moment you can hear Rennala's motif. There's regality and elegance, there's a female dominant choir, and it gives this sense of responsibility that cannot be forsaken, represented by the lower strings delivering that ramping tune, emphasising that it can't be helped. We've got the twinkling of the moon sounds, very similar to Rennala. And then you've got the viola and cello, which work as a duet with their own melodies and some slight counterplay, but in tandem, perhaps representing the two sides to Rellana again, who she is compared to what she fights for. And interestingly, in the second phase these melodies become, at points, more in unison, perhaps like moon and fire coming together here. But similarly, this phase is much more bloodied, it's more desperate and repetitive, and the elegance and grace of the first phase takes a backseat. I really love this soundtrack, but I don't think it adds much new lore to Rellana's fight, so 3.5 out of 5. As for my opinion on Rellana, there may not be much lore on her, but I do think that the game does a stellar job at emphasising a character who should have been so important, coming across as almost forgotten. Her themes are clear, her prowess, but the sad tone of her story, and the lack of clear impact really resonates well. It is a shame there couldn't have been more though. I'd hoped to continue learning as I went through the DLC, but sadly she's an unfortunate example of the first impression being pretty on point. A small castle, a skippable boss encounter, and lore that only really serves as a side story to other, more important events. So I'm going to give her a 3 out of 5, which leaves Rellana on a 14.5 out of 20. In 9th position, we have Rellana, Saint of the Bud. Rellana was a saint of a Horn-Sent church in the ancient ruins of Roar, the Church of the Bud, but after the devastation of Messmer's crusade, where the church was burnt to the ground and she alone survived, she discovered a twisted divine element which she weaved into the baleful scarlet rot, causing her form to change. This new faith spread through the area and even caused the local scorpions to multiply in size. She took in the abandoned butterflies who had no master, and was as a mother to the forgotten pests. And she remained in the church ever since, tending to the rot. Rellana's gameplay right from the introduction is very humble. She has no cutscene and no dialogue. Her attacks have lots of twirls, spirals and spinning. There's a flow between them, an elegance, a very fluid energy. There is beauty in the activity of rot. The way she moves, the other creature aspects are not separate to her. They only attack where she looks and instructs. Various attacks bring butterflies to life, only for them to die shortly afterwards in beautiful but rot-fueled explosions. A great example of the life cycle of rot. Rellana is quite a simple, if beautiful fight, with not too many attacks, all of which seem to show that she is not one raised in combat. She's not about fighting, she's not particularly difficult. You can also summon Dryleaf Dane, which helps to push that Rellana is a required boss fight for Miquella's journey too. While there isn't tons here, I do think that Rellana's fight aptly demonstrates the qualities of rot and Rellana's history. So while I wish she had a cutscene, I do think the fight represents what Fromsoft wanted very well. 4 out of 5. Moving on to visuals, Rellana is a half scorpion, half centipede. In the base game, scorpions were already paired to rot, but centipedes had associations with death. So, given the turnover of rot, does this mean that scorpions are a form of life? In addition to these creatures, there's themes of flowers and fruit across her design, spreading the seeds, the scarlet buds. It feels more fleshed out than Malenia's quality of rot. She even has a wasp stinger, and butterfly wings too of course. Rellana's colour palette is pink, which is different to Malenia's scarlet, which is more red. Rellana is less chaotic, and more thoughtful. The area around has rot throughout, but not very far, and it's not very thorough. Even the church itself is a bit of a surprise, and is somewhat unremarkable at first glance. Honestly, regarding the build-up and the anticipation of this boss, it feels like there's various parts which were underutilised. She was teased in the story trailer, as shown by her weapon, but we learn little about this even in her fight. She feels both important, a required boss fight, defending the ceiling tree, but also unimportant. I'd say the visuals are great, but they don't really add that much to her lore, so 3 out of 5. Moving on to Rellana's soundtrack, the first thing you hear is the organ. There's a real quality of religion here, of someone who ought to be a protector, but there's a broken quality here. It's as though the person hasn't lived up to their role. It feels somber, and the melody is really quite gentle. Despite the high first impression, the piece isn't celebratory, and the tune cascades downwards throughout the piece, almost like it's lamenting, going lower where you would expect the melody to go higher if it were heroic or purely saintly. Then the cello takes over, a lower instrument, a sense of warmth but also of depression and of defeat. Then there's the second phase, which is much more powerful. There's rapid scaling up and down, it's chaotic, there's a sense of spinning, turmoil, turnover. It's delicate and fast and elegant, just like butterflies. There's a use of brass here, which symbolises the betrayal, which counters the soprano's melody. It's as though they were meant to help, but they couldn't do anything. And then there's also the motif from the soundtrack from Malenia, Goddess of Rot, which could be relating to her, or it could also be just a rot motif commentary. However, the piece goes quiet for it. It's an isolated reference. and then you hear the shared melody. The composer chose to do that, to make it clear. It's about the comparison here, and overall, there's just this powerful sense of loss, as though she's a broken version of herself. I think this piece is incredible and really adds to the backstory of Rellana. 4 out of 5. My opinion of Rellana has evolved since my first playthrough, and now I think Rellana is a beautiful and new presentation of Rot, and I think there's more to her than meets the eye. Her music is somber and paints her story well as her relation to Rot and thus Malenia. For someone teased in the story trailer, her impact on the lore is surprisingly small. Her church is not really built up at all, and as one of only 3 required bosses of the DLC, I can't help but be left with a sense of missed potential for Rellana, who didn't even get a cutscene or any voice lines. With all that said, however, I do love what Fromsoft did manage to do with Rellana's lore, even if there was missed potential, as through her and the DLC as a whole, we can see a much more positive side of Rot compared to the base game, which I really enjoyed learning about, just like Rot can be good in our own world. So I'm going to give Rellana a 4 out of 5, which leaves Rellana with a 15 out of 20 overall. In 8th place is the Putrescent Knight. In the age before the Erdtree, death was burned in ghost flame. However, some tainted flesh was never burnt, sealed away in these giant stone coffins. This flesh devolved over time into putrescence, as it always does, which oozed from the coffins down into the chasm below. One clump of this then imbibed St. Trina's nectar, who had been cast down there by Miquella in his journey to godhood. This finally granted it eternal rest, and so it was that putrescence became her knight. Once again, this boss doesn't have a cutscene, and has a somewhat understated entry running in from the far side. However, once you've beaten the boss, you realise that he was running over from St. Trina. The first impression here is a lack of appreciation of any form of grandeur. This is not some knight with a long history, it's there only for its master, not for caste. There is no emotion, just a duty. This boss has a bizarre moveset, and diving beneath the putrescence makes it clear that this isn't a knight that's infected, but one born of it. In the second phase, the knight introduces Ghost Flame, which nicely emphasises the pairing to putrescence, especially due to the renewed drama in these attacks. There's a reverence, a respect for the Ghost Flame. You can summon Tiolier for this fight, which is a nice addition that does suggest the link to St. Trina, and the power they can have on someone who appeared very timid previously. So the fight does give some information on the putrescent lore, but the knight gives little indication of who they're fighting for. The fight can be hard to understand, but overall it's not too difficult. This is not an epic knight, or even one bestowed with incredible power through circumstance, but one who must fight you nonetheless. I think everything here is good, but there's not that much new lore to pass here, so 3 out of 5. Moving on to visuals, the Putrescent Knight is locked behind an area Miquella sealed away. It's an area of little features. It's a forgotten, strange chasm filled with these odd stone coffin ships melded within the rock. There's little in the way of build-up or expectation, other than this purple miasma that fills the area, and the putrescence spreading everywhere. But then suddenly, there are these sleeping animals, a theme in various world stories. Looking at the boss itself, the mix of biology emphasises the unnatural quality that gives rise to putrescence, the coming together of all things. Though the ride and the rider seem to be related, sharing some horse forms, and the ride has no eyes, where the rider has glowing disembodied eyes. The arena itself is somewhat unremarkable too, a pit where putrescence has fallen and become imbued with the intoxicating aroma of St. Trina, a forgotten, cast-away area. Honestly, this is all pretty fitting. This isn't a grand, complicated design, and that's exactly what Fromsoft wanted with the knight's lore. All this, plus the curiosity that the area before builds up, gives the knight here 4 out of 5. Moving on to the soundtrack, we have lots of unrelenting building and a sense of growth, but then later there's this celestial harmony. It makes use of the harp, which is always an angelic sound, so there's purity, innocence, and vulnerability there. But aside from that, there's this constant undulating rhythm underneath, symbolising the putrescent knight, a quality of heroism, rolling, just like he does. It emphasises how loyal this knight must be from the undulating rhythm, but it's got a positive tone. It's not oppressive like Bayle or Messmer, and it's not sad like the Erdtree avatar. It's a loyal enthusiasm towards something, and the soprano and deeper undulations bounce off each other beautifully. And across it all, there's the harp, which is incredible. A bit of hope, light, and peace, always there. I think for what Fromsoft was going for, the soundtrack is fantastic. Where through the previous qualities it was difficult to get that sense of Saint Trina, here we feel Saint Trina's influence throughout the song, and I think the lore of the night is accented really well by this piece, so 4.5 out of 5. As for my opinion, perhaps it's because I expected Trina to be a somewhat subtle character from the base game's lore, but I think this knight beautifully illustrates the unimpressive nature of putrescence and the relationship to Saint Trina. This is not some epic disease, but a sad withering away of tainted flesh. Similarly, Trina is not a mastermind, but a force of nature. The fight is emotional, with the music, the falling entrance, and the humble cave. It doesn't present as a place of utmost importance, and I like Fromsoft games with the odd stories that don't need to be about the end of the world, or the cycle of humanity itself. This boss and the arena feels like a compelling NPC quest, where it's less about the content or relevance to the world, and more about the emotional impact of the events. And the knight aptly demonstrates and sets up Trina, and in a way Tiolier too. So I'm gonna give it 4 out of 5, which leaves the putrescent knight with 15.5 out of 20. Next, in 7th place, we have the Divine Beast Dancing Lion. In the Hornsent culture, horned warriors strive to become divine beast warriors through martial prowess. The very best of these, who excel at divine invocation, are chosen to become sculpted keepers. These are given the honour of performing the ritual of the lion dance during the festival. Made of 2 sculpted keepers working together, they are the messengers of the heavens who through their dancing and cavorting are blessed with the power of the storm and its elements. During Messmer's crusade, they were turned towards combat and most perished. Now there are only 2, one at the height of Bayle guarding the main entrance to Anir Elim, and one in the ancient ruins of Roar. For the sake of this ranking, we'll mostly be considering the one at Bayle. This is the first boss in our ranking that actually has a cutscene. The cutscene quickly illustrates the cultural importance of these people, but also the otherworldly powers at play, almost reviving them. This is not 2 people anymore, but one divine being that these performers are hosting. Despite seeing the people beneath, we see the eyes light up, further confirming a real magic or divine power at play. The lion dance themes are clear from the start, and though it is elegant and graceful, we see the choreographed mastery too in the slight mechanical sounds and motion. The difficulty of the fight makes it clear that this was no standard lion dance they hailed from. Whatever they are not weak or lacking martial skill, and this all culminates in the second phase, where the music, motion, and power all rise up in unison to perform an exhilarating and powerful display of the storm. The Divine Beast Dancing Lion can also be healed by your Crimson Flasks if you use them after being caught in their biting grab attack, so we immediately see that there's some real relationship between their power and that of the Erdtree, and this sense of power is clear from how it focuses on carrying out its proper motion and dancing rather than just attacking. The second beast in the ancient ruins shows that these beings are flexible and can be altered, since this one can channel Deathblight and spawns basilisks. And interestingly, by placing a second within the world, it ironically emphasises how few of them are left, after their thorough execution in Messmer's crusade. Redmane Freya can also be summoned for this fight, which pushes the sense of fighting prowess the lion exhibits, and also illustrates the path Mikola took. We could spend a lot longer picking apart everything here that gives a bit of lore, but the overall picture is clear. There's tons of additional lore you can get from the gameplay here. The only thing is that it's quite hard to take this all in during a normal playthrough, so 4.5 out of 5. The Divine Beast is found at the height of Bayle after seeing various horned warriors, and barring access to what will become Anir Elim. Their cultural significance is immediately clear. Similarly, the wake of the crusade is clear. Bayle and the Beast have fallen from the height they once stood at. Looking at the arena, this place is of a festival. It's a place that was once celebratory, a show for the populace. Looking at the boss, the eyes glowing is a subtle nod to the technique of divine invocation, something that even a new player will intuit. The manner in which the storm is channeled also belies the true nature of the power being used here, the nature of divine invocation, and how it differs from most other divine powers seen in the base game. It comes not from within, but from somewhere else, a channeling of an external power. I've got to give some bonus points here for how devoted Fromsoft are to the animations. They're just sublime, though these are tough to make out without external tools. The horns decorating the beast further confirm the horn scent themes, as well as the repeating lion motif, which hints at a plethora of lore from the base game, and immediately establishes the divine beasts and the horn scent as a very important faction once, giving the divine beast a 4 out of 5 here. Listening to the soundtrack, the first thing you notice is the rapid scaling up and down, which mimics the sense of a dance and of jumping and falling. The beats in the back are unrelenting and give a constant sense of movement and bounding. The high flutes give a sense of celebration amidst all this anger and intense malevolence, and the Eastern style soundscape give a sense of divinity and holiness. And for the sections where the cello and violin are the focus, there's a beauty and elegance to the dance. The second phase has these waves of intensity, which mimics a storm or torrential downpour, and the chanting becomes much more forceful. Here it starts to feel more like a gladiator ring, like we're being forced to fight, and the divine beast is very confident, and we're just the fodder. The music isn't rageful or vengeful, it's confident and proud, maybe even joyful. And this is really incredible, but as the boss shifts in the elements, so too does the music correspond with this, aligning in its timing and emphasizing the dance-like aspect. I think the soundtrack is incredible and fits the fight beautifully, but I can't help but feel that I don't learn too much from the track, so 4 out of 5. Personally, I love the lore of this boss, but I also think that a lot of its incredible design is really tough to take in during the fight, and amazing details like the animations of the people beneath are difficult to see without special tools. If this was originally from a festival, I can't help but think that some of their dances should be slightly clearer for the audience, even in combat. The lore is clear, however, and you quickly understand the importance of these beasts to the horn scent. You get a sense of how they draw their power, and what horns may really mean, and the sense of the divine is powerful. However, to be honest, I didn't find myself asking many questions or wondering about them during my first playthrough as much as some other bosses, and their lore can feel a bit disparate at times. I feel like their lore serves as a fascinating subset of the horn scent's culture, and one of the highlights of the DLC, but they aren't so compelling on their own to me. So 3.5 out of 5, which gives the Divine Beast Dancing Lion 16 out of 20 overall. Coming in at 6th place is Meta. Meta is the mother of fingers and the finger creepers, and is a daughter of the Greater Will. She likely preceded even the Elden Beast, and received signs from the Greater Will from beyond the microcosm. But then this stopped, and despite being broken and abandoned, she kept waiting for another message to come. This showed that the two fingers, the alleged vassals of the Greater Will, the Elden Beast, and so on, have all been falsely claiming to be communing with the Greater Will. The prime influence for Marika's actions most likely right from the start, given the proximity between the Shaman village and a nearby finger ruins. Looking at gameplay, Meta has no cutscene, but the mystery formed from such a sudden appearance, and the fact that you have the space to take everything in before fighting, really emphasises the sense that this is something well beyond mere mortal issues. Meta doesn't even notice you until you get close enough. Her attacks are highly confusing, they're difficult to read from the amorphous body shape, and they're oddly timed. Everything she does is not as life as we know it would act. For example, it uses its head as its primary attacking tool, which in general is a complete contrast to our life forms, where the head is often protected, and instead it is teeth and claws that are used. The second phase evolves into a far more celestial question. There are attacks that are nigh impossible to dodge. chaotic attacks that are both powerful and beyond us. There are the finger attacks and spawning finger creepers, which naturally sheds light on Meta's history, and interestingly, Meta does seem to be bent on attacking us specifically. She does seem naturally aggressive, and is fast to close the distance in attacking us. She's hostile from the start once she notices you. Meta is not particularly difficult, but to beat cleanly is very hard. She's not built for combat, but is from a plane above ours. Notably, the fight also ends not with her death, but with her escaping through one of her void powers. Honestly, great design across the board here, and really gives that sense of a celestial being, and it all adds decently to her lore, so 4.5 out of 5. Moving on to visuals, there's one thing that stood out to me right from the start. It's that Meta has no thumbs, they're all fingers. Only the 3 fingers has a thumb, the chaotic, creative part of the hand. Meta's design is brilliant. At first it seems like an amalgamation of fingers, which does fit the lore and Fromsoft's pattern of literal metaphors, but on looking closer there are so many cosmic aspects as well. The antenna, satellite imagery, the Big Bang-like phase transition, the black hole imagery, the soul eye on the head. This is a being beyond our comprehension. The wound on her front is curious. In the fight she births finger creepers here, but is this how she always functioned? Is this a wound? It does seem oddly grounded and similar to nature compared to the rest of the celestial themes. Perhaps finger creepers are all she can produce now, where once she could make 2 fingers. The lead up to Meta is brilliant. While in terms of gameplay it might have been dull, the emotional and awe-inspiring impact of the finger ruins, mixed with the lack of features, emphasises that this isn't something we can understand. This isn't a topic for a mere tarnished. It deals with matters far beyond the common folk. The arena also reminds me of that of the Elden Beast, but the themes are much more difficult to pass. What are these tubes exactly? Overall, the curiosity and questions are really well placed, but having questions that cannot be answered isn't the only quality a being like Meta should have, and Ymir's lead up is misleading in some ways too. 4 out of 5. Meta's soundtrack is so unique. It's immediately celestial, religious, and otherworldly. It feels like a god in a vast space, a sense of cosmic horror. The sopranos with the open vowels emphasises this sense of vastness and this huge space we've tapped into. The high notes coming down could be representing the lowering from the high heavens, down to earth, the lands between perhaps, a meteorite. There's twinkling in there, which gives a sense of planets, and most of all, there's no real discernible melody. Melodies are something humans naturally lock into and identify with, and being unable to do so here generates a sense of uncertainty and vastness. And then Phase 2 expands upon this even further, beyond any form of comprehension. It sounds like a black hole. There's nothing to latch onto, as if we're always waiting for something to form. It's an empty sound space, there's no ebb and no flow. Honestly, it's bordering on just ambience and sound effects. Would you even consider this part music? Should it even be music? Notably, Meta actually makes noises of her own, though it might be difficult to notice during a normal playthrough. These noises are also very otherworldly, and honestly I wished it was easier to notice. I love how bold Fromsoft was with this soundtrack, and I think it really adds intuitively to our understanding of Meta, so she gets 4.5 out of 5 here. As for my thoughts, Meta is arguably the biggest lore revelation of the DLC. It's amazing how Fromsoft managed to tell so much of Marika's tale with only a few key events and locations. The impact on the lore and history of the Lands Between is huge, and certainly felt exciting to discover, and will continue to be fascinating to look into. Though her name is said in-game as Meta, some interpret it as Meteor, which could be cool too. For me, however, it felt like the build-up was a bit too long for how little concrete information we receive. The base game already made it clear how the 2 fingers were falsified and untrustworthy, so the primary interest here is the world building rather than the relevance to Marika's history, for example. I also think Ymir as a source of information is as unreliable as Hayeta's talk about the One Great, and can't be taken at face value. Though this is all absolutely the intended feeling as a player, I still wish the fight could have delivered something that allows us to theorise more on these fascinating themes, which we know is possible without losing the cosmic impression from how Bloodborne tackled them. So I'm going to give her 3.5 out of 5, which leaves Meta with 16.5 out of 20. Next up in 5th place is the Erdtree avatar. Erdtree avatars arose after the Elden Ring was shattered to protect the minor offshoots across the realm. The Erdtree is the shadow of the Erdtree, born of dark notions that bear no sense of order, that twist and bend its stock, rendering it brittle. And similarly, as shown by the incantation, there were once multiple Erdtree avatars, whose gold is accompanied by shadow, the head of a monstrous shadow sunflower manifestation of the Erdtree. Much like the Erdtree itself in appearance, a second stalk winds tightly around the first, almost as if in tender embrace. It is said that when the Erdtree crumbles from its core, that it will scatter across the entire realm of shadow. The people of the Erdtree collect the splinters and use them in prayer. So overall, these avatars resemble the tree they defend. The Erdtree avatar doesn't have a cutscene, but the fight does begin with a surprise, and continues with surprises to have 3 unexpected phases. Immediately it's clear that it seems desperate in its attacks, flinging things at you without complete certainty. It leads its movements with its head, and even attacks you with it many times. And yet, this is its weakest point by far, and can trivialise the fight with some builds. It's exceptionally weak to fire, it's practically walking kindling. It also seems unsure in its attacks, unpracticed. It wheels about, getting stuck, and breaking the area around it that seems to be made of similar stuff. It's quite a contrast to the Erdtree avatars, which make use of weapons and have stylised movesets. The gold and shadow projectiles neatly illustrate the nature of it and the Erdtree itself, and the contrast of this to the bright light explosions of the last-ditch effort of the 3rd phase shows that this is a form of contamination. There is pure light within it. Honestly, this last phase is really powerful. It feels almost self-sacrificial. It pushes itself to the limit, releasing everything it has, and collapses from the effort of doing so. There's a sense of inevitability, and of sadness, of a defeated, backed into a corner and giving up sort of way. And the result is that it barely ends up fighting you in this last phase. This boss isn't incredibly difficult, but it is a long fight with the multiple phases. It shows that it's hard to keep down, and it will fight right to its last breath. It does have high health overall, but it's easy to find the weak points, and easy to punish. The design here is great, and it definitely adds to the lore, so 4 out of 5. Moving on to visuals, you find this boss as close to the Erdtree as you can get. After a church with Marika within, it's secret, blocked off by the Shadowkeep, maybe even forgotten. The arena is a wasteland, with brittle trunks throughout, and no sign of life until the avatar emerges. This is not an epic, dramatic, or important battle. No one even knows it's happening. Mikla discarded his Great Rune, perhaps specifically here, thinking none would find it. Looking at the boss itself, there's a contrast here to the stump and root motifs of the Erdtree avatars. This is a sunflower with a twisted stump. It's spiky and epitomizes the blackened gold of the Erdtree. These dark colours, the slumped, heavy posture, and the twisting, spiralling, chaotic sprawling of its body and limbs immediately gets across the nature of the Erdtree. While the weakness may be from its history, this is the nature of the shadow of the Erdtree, and its posture in the final phase explosion even more clearly mimics that of the Erdtree itself. While all of this fits the lore well as a castaway, forgotten and ignored area of the world, I think there was a bit more that could have been discovered here. For example, the Marika church leading up to it could have been fleshed out somehow. 4 out of 5. The soundtrack for the Erdtree avatar starts with this explosive string melody. It's sharp and surprising, but immediately has this degree of sadness. It's actually a beautiful rendition of the Erdtree avatar theme, slowed down and put at lower octaves to give this sad result. This first phase feels sad, but perhaps inevitable, like there's no choice. The second phase starts to feel more like a dance, with these tremulous wells, and then there's these undertones beyond the desperate struggle that feels as if there's been some form of great tragedy, as if this fight wasn't how it was supposed to be. and then there's the third phase. The music feels like it's limping, like it's a shadow of its former self, if you'll pardon the pun. There's barely anything left, even in the sopranos, and everything's just that much slower. And though it's still trying and not accepting the sense of defeat, it feels out of breath. There's soul, desperation, desire, want, but it can't get there. Honestly, I think this soundtrack alone depicts the lore of the Erdtree avatar perfectly, and I can't really imagine it being better. So this soundtrack gets a 5 out of 5. The Erdtree avatar is a characterful, surprising, and entertaining fight that shocks you with the emotion you can have from killing a giant sunflower. I love the lore behind this boss, the poetry of the arena, the music, and the themes being tackled, and I look forward to experiencing the fight more, where I expect the depth to multiply. I do think we could have been taught more about the Erdtree, since one of the strangest things about the DLC is that Fromsoft ended up telling us so little about it. But personally, the Forgotten Flowers lore didn't leave me feel wanting, and I'm really glad for the boss being there. 4 out of 5. Giving the Erdtree avatar 17 out of 20. Coming in at 4th place is Promised Consort Radahn. A lord will usher in a god's return, and the lord's soul will require a vessel. The final boss of the DLC, Promised Consort Radahn, is the twist and the result of all the actions and planning of Miquella.
So that he may be my consort.
Using the corpse of Mog, Radahn was granted a vessel to fulfill the childhood promise of some sort to become lord to Miquella's god. The Godfrey to Marika, the Placidusax to another god. Miquella was able to ascend to godhood through the same gate of divinity as Marika. He cast away his grace, his lineage, the original sin, and even his love to fulfill this. And in this way, Radahn is reborn, and Miquella joins him as a new god with the intent to usher in a new age of compassion. To start off the gameplay, Radahn actually has 2 cutscenes, and they're both of epic proportions. The grandeur of this fight is clear from the outset. The Divine Gate, the highest place in the realm of Shadow, fighting a consort and a god. Unlike so many fights we've already looked at, this really is an epic fight. The Radahn introduction mirrors that of the story trailer against Melania, emphasising that this is prime Radahn. And interestingly, this Radahn is much smaller than the Star Scourge, and with the image of Morgott fighting him from the Shattering, this might suggest that it was rot that caused his size. The fight starts as a clean duel, honourable, no tricks, and it feels grand. There is order and training and confidence in Radahn. He mixes in gravity attacks just like those he used as the Star Scourge, but on a different scale, and he even has a blood flame attack harkening to Mog's body he now uses. The second phase cutscene is magnificent, epic, grand, and terrifying all at once. It's a sensory overload, the epitome of a god and their consort, something we've not experienced before, the god and their lord both in their prime. Once again, Miquella does all the speaking here. Radahn does not appear to be an agent of complete free will, so much as an extension of Miquella here. Miquella then imbues every attack with their power, but the fight is still with Radahn, and Miquella is only carried on his back. The addition of Miquella's light powers transcends the fight into a blinding, stressful, and relentless barrage of attacks, and honestly, perfectly encompasses the sense of holy awe and fear that a new god would inspire. There's no room for mistakes, and the difficulty is extreme even after the recent patches. The moveset is graceful and beautiful while also being overwhelming, something that I actually think fits the lore of who you were really fighting against, almost too bright to look at. From the epic meteoric explosions to the light of Miquella annihilating the arena, there can be no doubt what is at stake here and who you are fighting. And the grab attack is a bold illustration of the charm Miquella now wields, for if grabbed twice, you'll adopt the "let us go together" gesture and seemingly die with your heart stolen. And to elevate the impact of this encounter even further, you can summon Tiolier and Ansbach for this fight, culminating 2 fantastic NPC journeys alongside yours. The ending cutscene is a little confusing and requires knowledge from beyond the immediate vicinity to start to pick up, but other than that, I think this fight perfectly encapsulates the lore Fromsoft wrote, giving the gameplay 4.5 out of 5. Moving on to visuals, at the height of the Tower of Shadow of Anir Elim, the build-up, the anticipation for reaching Miquella in a divine station is very powerful, and the promise for a potential future of an age of compassion, looking out over the entire land of Shadow. It is certainly a regal, epic, and clearly important event. This is a fight that will go down in history. The previous fight with Miquella's followers also sets up the controversy of your decision as a Tarnished to shut down Miquella's promise of a 1,000-year voyage filled with compassion. Everything is beautiful, mysterious, intimidating, and grand, right to the ground you walk on, and the suggested deep history that created this once fleshy area into a stony, petrified arena. The gate and bodies on the floor even bleed when you hit them. A cool detail is this ring of Miquella's seen in the ending cutscene is not worn in the battle, but is actually found on his corpse in Mog's arena. As for the boss, Radahn looks young, has braided hair, and his eyes glow with grace, but he also has horns sprouting from Mog's influence. Otherwise, he's classic Radahn. Miquella, on the other hand, is finally in adult form, and his hair, though still braided, falls like a giant curtain around Radahn and the Tarnished during their fight. He glows, almost spirit in some ways, and he has 4 arms, though one is only part-way visible. He certainly feels like a god. Honestly, from the build-up, the arena, and the boss design, there is ample evidence for just how important this location and encounter is, and adds to the lore tons, while also leaving you with questions and a sense of total awe. So I think the visuals have to get full marks here. 5 out of 5. As for the soundtrack, it's immediately clear that we don't have the dying Radahn anymore from the base game. We have a very much alive and well and powerful Radahn. It feels face to face, there's no barrier, no horse, no challenge, it's a one-on-one duel. And then the choir tenor section hits these crazy high notes. It's rip-roaring singing, it's amazing. It really is heralding a warrior, it's a primal scream. It requires the power of the full body, laying it all out and showcasing all the intensity. It's ferocious and powerful, but it remains regal. And then there's the phase 2, where you immediately notice this angelic choir, which quickly stands out from the previous masculine virility. There's church bells, long, sustained notes, and there's a much more religious quality now. It feels bright, heralding the second coming. It's positive and happy and hopeful at times, and fearful at others. There's still Radahn's essence here and there, and there's a duality within the music, but the angelic quality transcends it, and us, and the boy's voice in the choir clearly seems to represent Miquella, and the overall impression is that it feels like seeing the bright light of God. What more do you want? This track is incredible, and couldn't fit the lore of Prime Consort Radahn and Miquella any better. It adds tons, and it feels like exactly what Fromsoft wanted us to feel. 5 out of 5. Like everyone else, Promised Consort Radahn left me feeling torn. There's the whole Radahn twist on one side, which I hardly need to explain as being somewhat surprising to say the least, but on the other side, even before the recent changes, I think this might be one of the best fights Fromsoft has created that truly delivers on the fantasy they're trying to present. Every moment in this fight perfectly delivers the feeling that I, a humble Tarnished, am fighting a true god, and their Lord Consort who towers over me, accompanied by that blinding, overwhelming feeling that would naturally accompany such an endeavour. The music, arena, and attacks are all overwhelming while playing, but each is incredible to witness, barring some platforming issues dodging near to the Divine Gate, and it makes sense that fighting a god would be an overload of intensity. In contrast, this is one of the reasons I think the Elden Beast fight is so powerful, with how it totally subverts these expectations and presents a much more beautiful and delicate fight than seen here. So some of the best and some of the not worse, but definitely less positive aspects means that at this time I can't give higher than 3, though I wouldn't be surprised if it goes up over time, which leaves Promised Consort Radahn with 17.5 out of 20. Coming in at 3rd place is Bayle the Dread. In a time long past, Bayle turned upon the Dragon Lord. The foul traitor assailed their master and inflicted a grievous wound, only to make a hasty retreat, becoming a sworn enemy of the Brood. Since that day, Bayle and his bloodline, the Drakes, have served as sacrifices for Dragon Communion. Bayle was the Foul Dragon's name, a terrible harbinger of destruction whose challenge to the ancient Dragon Lord ended in a grievous mutual injury. Looking at his gameplay, Bayle doesn't have a cutscene. He simply drops down from high above, setting the tone of the fight immediately. This is not the Lord of the Dragons. This is not grand, at least not in that sense. He's aggressive, angry, and forceful. You feel personally attacked by this boss. It's a form of actual malice, not just station like so many others we fight. Bayle is also severely injured. His wings have been severed, leaving bone stumps. He is missing a leg and has injuries all over. Though this will be considered in the visual section, his moveset depicts this too, so I wanted to talk about it here. He uses his bone stump as a supporting arm to offset the imbalance moving only on one leg. He uses his tail to prop himself up and allow him to walk. He's also adopted a smaller posture, sitting on his feet, curled inwards to keep in control, where he would actually be far larger, completely extended. All of this shows not just his determination and his penchant for violence, but that he sustained these injuries a long time ago, and he's extremely deadly despite these injuries. And yet, sometimes, as he gets lost in the heat of battle, he also expects to have this leg, stumbling in surprise after, for example, a tail swipe and his leg isn't there. His second phase really pushes this determination. Seemingly through sheer anger and will, he sprouts ghostly wings that allow him to fly and fire off a terrifying, magnificent barrage of new attacks. He is extremely difficult, and still feels large despite his posture. This is a force of nature, something we should really think twice about before fighting. And then you can summon Egon. Egon doesn't add much in terms of lore, but his tale further emphasizes the scale of the dragon's fury, power, and sheer presence. He is Bayle the Dread.
Curse you, Bayle!
Everything here depicts the lore of Bayle perfectly, and I don't think you could ask for more, so 5 out of 5. Moving on to visuals, it's really the entire region that builds to Bayle, and it does this incredibly well. The sense of foreboding, the power of the wind and lightning, which stops after the battle by the way, showing the constant power Bayle exerted. It occludes our vision and impedes our progress. There's dead dragons, dragons fighting each other, and an ancient dragon at the end of it all, which certainly paints a confusing picture, one of dragon strife and civil war. There's the Dragon Communion priestess, and the enormous dead dragon beside her, which perfectly illustrates the true might of Bayle the Dread. From afar, we would naturally think that the fell dragon must be the most terrifying thing in the region, but it pales in comparison. It was simply a victim of the communion that was began to try hunt Bayle himself and his offspring. And all these dead dragons may simply be attempts to kill Bayle, or perhaps he too is eating his brethren for power. The ancient dragon man also sets up the lore of Dragon Communion well, who was once an arbiter of those worthy to devour the dreaded one. The arena also seems to hearken to that of Placidusax, but here the sharp, jagged peak represents Bayle's character well. The height of hell, this is a bad creature we've found. Looking at the boss himself, the curled horns denote relations to the crucible, the mixing of life, and that of basal forms compared to the regal dragon horns. Not to mention, of course, the satanic themes. As we've already looked at, his injuries tell an incredible story of his fight with Placidusax, not least by the 2 Placidusax heads that remain on his back with their jaws locked into his flesh all these years later. Personally, his wounds feel much more grievous than Placidusax's, which fits with him being the one who ran. Interestingly, in the second phase, the spectral wings are not overlaid on his arms, which may also harken to his ancient lineage too. The colour of his lightning and fire reflects a basal, emotional nature, a far cry from the regal gold of Placidusax, though he did use red lightning. And the sheer visual flair of all of Bayle's attacks are just breathtaking. What more could you want? 5 out of 5. Listening to his soundtrack, it feels truly antagonistic towards the player. Bayle really wants us dead, and it makes him sound just bad, that we're in the way of an actual evil he wants to do. There's big cymbal crashes, a thrust of vitriol, brass and drums, there's brutality, violence, and blind, scary rage. But there is also some grace within, a sense of a fallen knight somehow in the strings. And perhaps here, through the piano and cello, there's almost a connection to another character where there was some loyalty that was severed. And in the second phase, the music really deviates from this intensity at all times, and emphasises the sense of two forms, two phases. It feels a bit more ethereal and cosmic. Compare all this to how placid Placidusax's soundtrack is in comparison. Which is much more elegant, big and open, where this is short, sharp and stocky. This piece is just amazing, but I don't feel it adds as much as the previous sections, so 4.5 out of 5. Bayle's design is incredible, and perfectly encompasses the evil themes surrounding his lore. The build-up is breathtaking, and the epic showdown befits one who managed to go toe-to-toe with Placidusax, not to mention Egon, who cranks everything up to 11.
Your fears made flesh.
It's awesome we finally have an answer to how Placidusax got injured, and the twist on Dragon Communion fleshes out the lore of the land in a big way. However, the dragons as a whole remain as a far-off faction that is difficult to pass, and I just wish we could learn more about their history. Bayle's story, though really interesting, is surprisingly self-contained, which works for some other characters, but for an ancient Drake, I can't help but wish there was more about the civilization. 4 out of 5. Which leaves Bayle with 18.5 out of 20. Coming in at second place is Messmer the Impaler. Messmer is the son of Marika and perhaps related to Melina. A malevolent snake writhed within Messmer, and so his very mother plucked out his eye and put in its place a seal of grace. Yet, having done so, her fear compelled her to secret away her child within the realm of Shadow, hidden away, keeping company with the original sin, and a hatred that would not be confined. This was the Abyssal Serpent, the kindling that burned inside Messmer the Impaler, a dark thing, eaten away at by a wicked serpent. Marika sent Messmer on a crusade to purge the civilization that had been so cruel to her, the Hornsent, who, for a time, had been allies to the Erdtree. His knights came from renowned families who were chased from their homes due to their allegiance with Messmer. He impaled the Hornsent and the divine beasts with ease, and then he was left, abandoned by his mother in the land veiled from the lands between, unsure what had happened or why. Messmer is the only other boss with multiple cutscenes. Both effortlessly set the tone, intention, and mental state Messmer is in. He may even use his snakes to see right from the start, but especially after the second cutscene. His voice actor perfectly illustrates the sense of a reluctant villain, tired of his role.
In the embrace of Messmer's flame.
Who has sacrificed his sense of self, his sense of pride, and his free will in the name of his mission, in the name of his mother, and his shaky voice in the second cutscene is really powerful.
A lord devoid of light.
Though his delivery is different to the trailers.
Mother, wouldst thou truly lordship sanction in one so bereft of light? Mother, wouldst thou truly lordship sanction in one so bereft of light?
I think this ultimate style better represents the role of Messmer and how sympathetic his role is as a villain. He is less emotional, sure, but this aligns better with his lore. Messmer is relentless, aggressive, and fast, utilising techniques that work only for him and only he could have developed. He fights honourably, there are no gimmicks and no trickery, fighting only once he has said aloud his intention to kill you, and why. His second phase is interesting. The role of eyes and grace to control Messmer's nature and his curse is made clear. His devotion to Marika even now remains strong, and it's shown that he will leave no stone unturned to make her proud. There are multiple snakeheads at once during his new attacks, which are both an extension of Messmer at times, where he moves at one with the Abyssal Snake, and separate, launching attacks separately before he follows up with his spear. Messmer is really difficult, but personally, given how he is meant to have easily killed multiple Divine Beast Dancing Lions in the Crusade, I think he might be on the easy side when compared to how difficult that fight is. Other than higher damage and health, at this point I believe many would say the Dancing Lion is the tougher fight. You can summon Hornsent or Jolan, which adds further depth to the encounter and what Messmer symbolises for the region. Other than his difficulty, everything here is perfect and really adds to his lore. 4.5 out of 5. Moving to Messmer's visuals, the biggest first impression is how unremarkable the arena is. It's a side tower to the Shadow Keep, defending nothing, sealed away with Messmer on an Elden throne by the only statue of Marika in the Realm of Shadow that retains her head. This is not an epic encounter for the fate of the land. This is a sad, inevitable encounter, confronting a man who is broken from the role his fate has given him, confused where his mother is, and what her intentions are even so many years later, and on seeing the Tarnished. His lopsided, grievously wounded frame with winged snakes epitomises Messmer well, and his form in the second phase even more so. With the snakes changing colour as though having shed their skin, we see his true form. He begins with only one sealed eye, one closed, but now is severely burnt right through the skin, with his seal removed. His nails become claws. There are actually two snake forms, the summoned version and Messmer's own snake form. The latter mirrors Messmer's appearance, with an abyssal eye socket, red hair and damaged flaking skin. This one is also decently larger than the summoned snake, which itself is much less damaged. It seems the abyssal serpent may not have just been within him, but part of him in some manner, though his remembrance does describe them as separate. Both these snake forms have many eyes throughout, even within their mouths. His suffering is clear, and the lore of Marika, snakes, the Erdtree, the Hornsent, and perhaps even Radahn have all been improved markedly from his presence. However, much of this incredible design is really difficult to see in a normal playthrough, especially in the dim room with a very uniform colour palette, giving Messmer a 4.5 out of 5 here. Messmer's soundtrack borrows motifs from the main theme of Elden Ring, as in the theme of Radahn, but it's more vicious due to the chorus and the drums, and then there's even a little bit from the Elden Beast. It's a slow build to start. Messmer is at his wit's end. It's not the brandishing sound of a hero, but a broken individual backed into a corner with no sense of direction. It makes him sound more like an accessory than the source of the bad actions. The rhythm of the strings is quite pared back, quite somber, rather than heroic or evil. It's of pain and of loss of self, and yet the drums are still strong, to give that sense of the warrior and of his power, even if they are subdued. And then in phase 2, there's lots of empty space, crunch dissonance, and then resolution. Here we can make out a reimagining of the Elden Ring theme, which indicates that Messmer is responsible for what has happened. He's a big player, else how could that be so prevalent? He is a villain, but he never had a choice to be anything else. As such, there's loads of undertones of sadness accompanying this main melody, and the overall feeling is being up against a wall, consumed to his entire being with nothing left to lose. It's very in your face and ruthless, but all the while very sad. This piece is amazing and adds loads to Messmer's lore. 5 out of 5. As for my opinion, Messmer is honestly a pretty flawless boss. The encounter is both epic and sad. It's terrifying and sympathetic, and for what Fromsoft chose to do with Messmer's tale, I think even the odd location works well. But I can't help but wish that the state of Messmer's dejection could have been delivered just as well, while still managing to have his build-up not feel so out of place. 4.5 out of 5, which gives Messmer an 18.5 out of 20. Which means that Bayle and Messmer are actually tied for second, and it was only my opinion that decided the order. And so, in first place for the most loresome boss in Shadow of the Erdtree, we have Midra, Lord of Frenzied Flame. Midra is a sage of the Hornsent Society. He's a scholar worthy of respect, called the Great Midra even now, with a vast library full of research. Then something happened to his sanctum as the seeds of frenzy began to sprout. From a once lush region, it became forbidden by the Hornsent, and inquisitors were sent to stamp out the threat to all life, including spirits. Some were tortured and a golden stake thrust into their head stumps outside the manse to prevent potential risk and to send a message. Midra, above all others, was tortured indefinitely in an execution like no other. Nanaya, his partner, whether deliberate or not, cursed him with but one word uttered to him before his endless suffering: endure, until a nameless tarnished pushes him to the brink and he becomes the Lord of Frenzied Flame. Looking at gameplay, Midra resetting to his standard form every time may suggest the story couldn't work if he transformed to the Lord of Frenzy and then the Tarnished left. Then his cutscene illustrates the extreme state Midra was pushed to, that he had to set aside everything he had believed in and betray the final words of his partner, Nanaya. That was what pushed him over the edge, and the voice acting for this is incredible.
I ask you forgive me, dearest Nanaya.
And then, his fight is a brilliant illustration of frenzy, which is not a restart, nor a total chaos embrace. It's a dance, a mad, gleeful embrace of suffering, such that all things are pushed into the same chaotic ending. He is now entitled enough to choose for all. He doesn't have that many attacks. Frenzy isn't about variety. He also could be far more aggressive and get many more attacks in, but he actually prefers to savour the moments, to savour the suffering. Interestingly, he also has more health than Radahn, which shows how powerful he is in some ways, and just how much he has gone through and can withstand. With all that said, he isn't that difficult. A Lord of Frenzy isn't all about power. This isn't Lord of the Erdtree who needed strength to be chosen and to enforce one religion across the land. It's about the strength of character to choose on behalf of all others, and to think they know better than their entire existence. And once he makes that decision, it isn't complicated either. There's no huge string of attacks, no crazy combos, and he even sees no reason to dodge. Though Midra resets, it's a shame there are no other nods to frenzy. For example, if we have already been embraced by the Three Fingers, nothing happens, nor does Melina say anything here. For other bosses, I wouldn't dock points for missing cool ideas in this way, but I think the sheer threat of a Lord of Frenzied Flame warrants some peripheral interactions like that. This isn't just some tyrant or celestial being. This is, in many ways, even grander, really the most important thing in the DLC, giving Midra a 4.5 out of 5. Moving on to visuals, Midra has an entire forest and mini-dungeon to build up this sense of fear, decay, and emptiness. And there's so little because this is what happens when Frenzy takes place. It's reduced to no life, no features, no events. The range of the voice acting is also incredible. The authority shown at first, the absolute disbelief at your stubbornness,
The depths of your foolishness!
and then his still, quiet resolution on being completely broken.
I have endured more than enough.
He does not lose himself, he loses his beliefs, and tosses them aside to embrace the simple way out, despite the absolute damage it must bring on the world. And the way he's stitched together, his torture really was endless. He was not allowed to fall apart or to die, and he was sealed away. The sense of being hidden from the world shows how much it is feared, but it does also slightly undermine the importance of the area. It can feel not so consequential finding him and killing him, and yet lore-wise, he's arguably the most important person to kill in the DLC. If he became the Lord of Frenzied Flame and isn't stopped, this would be much more devastating than any order Mikla may bring about. And interestingly, in this build-up, there isn't actually much on him, and instead the focus is just on the nature of frenzy. Curiously, he has no marks of the Three Fingers on him, suggesting that they are not required for the Lord to manifest. There are embers of some activity in front of him, but it's difficult to be sure what this means. And of course, the design of Midra once he's turned into the Lord of Frenzied Flame is simple but perfect, leaving Midra with a 4.5 out of 5. Moving on to sound, there's no music to start, but when the music does start, there's a real lack of impetus or movement. Maybe there's a rhythm, but maybe there's not. There's a foul chant, and everything is just really low, which gives this sense of size and impact. But also this gross, disfigured, peeling apart quality. There's lots of silence and then tons of all over the place dissonance. Then in the second phase it becomes really heavy. There's loads of crescendos, ebbs and flows. It feels like a wave, a force. But all the while there's still this dissonance. Then there's the motif of the nomadic merchants, which originally had a casual sense to it. And here it still has that quality, and yet it's totally transformed. The power, the sense of decay, and the importance here really makes this track feel like it should be the final boss. There's also a reverence, demanding respect, but not through good reasons, almost like the Antichrist demands fear. And importantly, unlike the first phase, this isn't all over the place. The first phase has a 5/4 time signature, which makes it erratic and uncanny, but the second phase shifts this timing so it's more synchronized. It's much more elegant and thoughtful in its motion. It's like a waltz. And then the end of the song has this dying out of the voices, leaving you with nothing left. Overall, this track sounds like it's an ancient rage. It's beneath the surface, but it's been awakened, and you can't ignore this sense of danger and this slow but inevitable expanse of power. I think the soundtrack is phenomenal, and by itself delivers such an incredible quality of frenzy. 5 out of 5. Midra is just fantastic. I think it would have been easy to make mistakes here. They could have busied the forest and made him an overly energetic and crazy fight and so on, but it took courage to make the area relatively empty. They invested so much of the map into the build-up. They emphasised the nature of a Lord of Frenzied Flame by making Midra reset if you die, which is different to bosses starting in their first phase. This would be like pulling the sword out from Udex Gundyr every time you fought him in Dark Souls 3. And through his dance-like attack pattern, lack of dodging, and blind glee in the chaos, you intuitively understand exactly what frenzy means for this world. The music is incredible, his visual design and build-up is amazing, and though I wish we were given a little more to go off regarding Nanaya, my enjoyment wasn't lessened by this, and I actually think the discussion surrounding her leads into the nature of frenzy itself, which I find fascinating. 5 out of 5, giving Midra a 19 out of 20. I hope you enjoyed this ranking of the Elden Ring DLC bosses. Before you go, I wanted to shout out Marco Meatball, a former opera singer who gives great insight into the soundtrack of all sorts of games, including some recently where he listened to the DLC tracks blind, and it's amazing how much comes through just from the music, so go have a watch if that sounds interesting. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed it, like the video and comment to let me know. And if you want more, you can support the channel by becoming a member or patron from less than $1 to get early access to future videos, unique Lore Before Bed episodes, and more.